Part 2: The Age of Ascension. In the beginning, the world of Enelis was ruled by the dragons. Stripped of their immortality, the dragons were still highly magical and powerful, roaming the land, the sea, and the air as the most supreme of creatures. The Firstborn, however, had only begun to take affinity with their surroundings. They were primordial, undefined humanoids, roaming the vast lands of Enelis. Excepting, of course, for the Daki and the Ravi, who had been tainted by the influence of Nembril and Solaris, respectively. They were separated from the rest of Enelis by the watchful eyes of the sea god Arian. Many millennia passed by, until one of the tribes of the Firstborn began to learn the ways of their inner power. They tapped into the same power that the dragons had long ago discovered, the ways of magic. These Firstborn, the Mari, who would eventually become the elves of today, they learned to harness their inner power. Some among them became powerful sorcerers and even began to challenge the dragons themselves. The early elves began to expand their domain and defeated the regional dragon overlords. However, they had yet to offer a serious danger to the rule and power of the dragons, so they were largely ignored as they expanded beneath the dragon's gaze. After many more generations, the early elves had greatly expanded throughout the eastern regions of Alarin. The innate power of the Firstborn was particularly strong in the ancient Mari, and these elves farther adapted to their new environments, creating 5 distinct elven ancestries. The gray-skinned Shadmar created the kingdom of Tenearvis in the eastern mountains, mastering the magic and knowledge of metalcraft. The golden-skinned Sulmar created the Society of Magnanarvis, ruling the central region of the Aegis Forest around a grand lake. They constructed beautiful cities of stone and crystal upon the lake. Greatest of all was the ivory-skinned Stelmar, who created a grand civilization along the eastern coast. Their mastery of magic was uncontested, as they constructed grand cities of glass and crystal. They codified the combinations of runes, gestures, and words of power, advancing their ancient, innate sorcery into a precise and powerful wizardry. The pale-skinned Ethmar scattered throughout the river valleys connecting the mountains, the forest, and the coast, with a vast trade network, connecting all the elven societies together. The last tribes were the shy, copper-skinned Thunmar, who kept a deep connection to the natural world, scattering throughout the great forests. Meanwhile, in the far south of Alarin, the great Sieth, or serpent folk empire called Sithis, dominated the southern jungles and the Cilician islands. They likely warred against and enslaved the Orca tribes in the region. In the more arid regions of the Shalaka Peninsula, the Theith, or lizard folk tribes, expanded throughout the region. On the small continent of Polaris, the noble and prosperous Gaga civilization of Helios grew. These mighty beings would be the ancestors of the Jotuns. The leaders of Helios, the Titans, would challenge the gods themselves. They questioned the cycle of Enis's creation and demanded immortality. Arian and the Elemental Queens took up the challenge of the Titans, and they destroyed Helios, blasting the continent with natural disasters, tsunamis, tornadoes, earthquakes, and volcanic explosions. Arian then set the continent to drift away from its comfortable temperate climate to the north, to be centered at the northern pole of the planet, forever cast in impenetrable ice. The remaining Gaiga refugees scattered to Alarin, forever corrupted and changed by the elemental and magical catastrophe. They eventually evolved to the many various Jotun ancestries: the elemental, stone, fire, frost, cloud, and storm, as well as the degenerate ogres, hill giants, trolls, and so forth. Meanwhile, the elven societies became more powerful, with the magic of the ancient Stelmar reaching into extremely powerful spells. The magical Stellabras, or Star Warmth, is created by the greatest Stelmar and Solmar Archmagi. This magical barrier was powered by the very light of the stars. It connected the mountains surrounding the Sulmar cities in the valley of Inarvis, creating a bubble of a perpetual warm and comfortable climate throughout the year. To the north, the Jotuns began to scatter down from the northernmost reaches of Alarin into northeastern shores and mountains. The varying clans would fight among themselves for domination and control of the region. The Age of Ascension. The dragons, feeling threatened by the growing might of the elves, they put aside their usual internal warfare and embarked on a genocidal attack upon the Stelmar of Astriarvis. They decimated the Star Elves, destroying their cities and society, and eventually exterminating the Stelmar entirely from Enelis. The 4 remaining elven societies united, forming the Kingdom of 4 Crowns. The 4 kings of the Shadmar, Thunmar, Ethmar, and Sulmar would unite their forces. After a long and deadly war, they would drive out the dragons from the region and prevent their own extermination. Deep beneath the surface of Enelis, the Khazra, or dwarves, would receive a premonition, a quest from the gods. They would begin the Thrinmirland, the quest for the Land of Stars. They would leave the darkness of their underground caverns, traveling ever upwards, seeking the surface world above them. They traveled through the Grimdring Crinsli, the endless road of shadows, through the dark caverns of the deep underground. Small hunter-gatherer tribes of humans began to appear along the eastern coasts in the wake of the exterminated Stelmar society. They would quickly expand along the eastern coasts. And according to ancient Shaya legend, one of these tribes were founded by the deities Avalasi the Skyfather and Hatsianib the Landmother, and they were taken under their protection. These deities brought these people to the peninsula of Shalhassa, where they would thrive in the humid jungles. Meanwhile, some of the Orca, or Green Orcs, would free themselves from Seath enslavement, and they'd scatter throughout the southern marshes. The smaller Unorca, or Goblinoids, would migrate through Alarin, with the bulk of them heading to the southern mountains. To the west, the Neri, or Gnolls, dominated the arid lands and deserts. Small clans of the Undri would head east from the western savannas and settle in the hillsides in the southern eastern coasts. These people, the Havashi, or what many would rudely call halflings today, disappear into the hills, barely noticed by the human tribes that dwelt there. The scattered clans of Jotuns are united under a single commanding presence, creating a hierarchy with the powerful storm giants ruling over the rest of the Jotun tribes. The Braelheim Empire then expands throughout the Northlands, enslaving many of the humans that dwelt there, the Proto-Neradri tribes. Many human tribes fled enslavement, and these would become the Proto-Deerfoot tribes, escaping into the more inhospitable lands of the farther north. The dwarven clans led by Thaladin Kalgeddon appear for the first time on the surface of Enelis. They find themselves emerge from the mountain caves on a lonely mountain on Polaris at the frozen pool. They begin to head southwards and search for the land promised to them by the gods, and thus the Thrirmerland continued. Meanwhile, back on Alarin, the Braelheim Empire reaches its peak of power, enslaving many human and goblin tribes in the region. They build many grand cities and monuments throughout the region, with all of the ample labor. The southbound dwarves continuously fight against the Jotuns, who block their path southward through the lands of far northern Alarin. They then cross the Frost Lake and reach the northern lands for the first time. The dwarves make their first settlements in the North Rim Mountains, beginning a long and arduous war with the Jotuns of the Braelheim Empire. However, the experience the dwarves gathered from fighting the Jotun tribes along their journey gave them many early victories against the giants. The dwarves continue to have victories against the Jotuns of the Braelheim Empire. The Jotuns secede much of their western lands as the dwarves continue to push southward. The dwarves free many of the human tribes from slavery along the way. Additionally, the giants find themselves being attacked by the dragons, who raise and assault many of their settlements. The dwarves reach the eastern mountains of Alarin, where they fight against the dragons, the Jotuns, and the diminishing Shadmar for control over the northern portion of the Calavarian Mountains. When they reach the wide valley and see the stars reflected and shining in the Miramor Lake, they know they were home. Here the dwarves believe they had finally found what they were looking for. They found Mirbalin, the promised land of stars. The Thrinmirlin was deemed fulfilled, and the dwarves set to create a permanent settlement, carving to the great Calavarian Mountains. In one final outrage of destruction, the dragons again gathered their support together and raged across Alarin. In the north, they decimated the already weakened Braelheim Empire, destroying much of the Jotun civilization. As the dragons flew south, they attacked the fledgling settlements of the dwarves. But these underground settlements proved easy to defend, and the dwarves repelled the invasion. The dragons then flew into Inarvis, but the wary elves banded together and repelled the dragons as well. Defeated, most of the dragons fled Alarin, leaving the continent to be ruled by the humanoid descendants of the Firstborn. The dwarves, now fortified in their mountain cities in Calavar, engage in an all-out assault on the Jotuns of the north. They continue to free the Proto-Neradri human slaves who helped the dwarves defeat their former captors. The Braelheim Empire begins to unravel, and their economy collapses with the loss of their slaves. The freed humans gather into warrior clans to fight back against their oppressors. Most of the dragons have now fled Alarin for the hidden continent of Terra Draconia. However, the remaining dragons split into two major philosophical groups. The first group, the Wrathworms, were filled with anger and fury, and they wanted revenge on the humanoids. The other group, the Waning Worms, however, had accepted humanoid dominance of the world. They would avoid contact with humanoids and otherwise leave them to their own devices. Able to fly across the Aryan Ocean, unhindered by the sea god's domain, some of the dragons of both groups arrived on the continent of Alaris for the first time. The Waning Worms remained aloof, hiding in the mountains and hidden places of the new continent. The Wrathworms, however, immediately set to work. They found that the Nembril-tainted Dokkan had an equal hatred for the other humanoids. The Wrathworms mingled their bloodlines with the Dokkan to create a powerful sorceress ancestry that could eventually dominate and destroy all other humanoids. The Braelheim Empire was eventually defeated. The Jotuns were hunted and slaughtered by both the dwarves and the emerging human Proto-Neradri clans. The remaining Jotuns scattered throughout Alarin, never achieving such power again for many ages. The dwarves helped the Neradri establish themselves in the northern lands, creating trade networks with the human clans. The new Neradri tribes began to expand quickly, soon coming into conflict with their southern neighbors, the Proto-Amari clans. The Waning Worms began to see the error of their brethren, as the Wrathworms begin to transform the Dokkan into a powerful destructive force. The Waning Worms began to take humanoid form as wizened old men, to secretly teach the ways of wizardry to the Proto-Nomenir in hopes of counteracting the Wrathworm-sponsored Dokkan. The tribes of Proto-Seldri humans began to expand across the southern coast, competing with the Goblinoids and Serpentfolk for resources. The Dokkan expand throughout their homeland of Nastis, ravaging the land with destructive sorcery. Meanwhile, the Proto-Nomenir begin to expand northward as their society grows. The two dragon-backed societies would learn of each other and soon face their destinies.